All right, everybody. So welcome today to this seminar. This is part of our series on agent-based modeling across the domains. Today I've been kindly joined by Dr. Holly Gaff and Dr. Alexis White. I've given them the grand task of talking about agent-based modeling in biology. I know that this is you obviously specialize within vector diseases. And so me asking you to explain biology when you're coming from this perspective is like someone asking someone from Singapore to explain every country in the world, right? It's not, it's not feasible. But I would ask, you are far more of an expert in biology than I will ever be on most of our audience. So we appreciate you being here to give that sort of insight. With that said, the format is that I'm going to ask a series of questions and then we're going to open it up to the audience. Okay. Just going to change to the speaker view. Okay. So with that said, it should be me speaking. So my first question is, could you give the audience a little technical introduction to your background as it relates to agent-based modeling and simulation?
Sure. So I'll start. I'm Holly Gaff, and my background in agent-based modeling goes all the way back to my graduate school days. So I did my PhD while I am in biology now. My PhD is in mathematics from the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. And my PhD advisor was Lou Gross, and I also worked closely with Tom Hallam and Don DeAngelis, and all of those folks were kind of some of the initial leaders in the field of applying agent-based models to biology. So during grad school, we worked quite a bit with Don DeAngelis on a South Florida Everglades restoration project. So while Andy, I agree, most of my current work is infectious disease work. My graduate part was half tick-borne diseases, which is my passion, as you will quickly learn in all my conversations. But also half of my dissertation was focused on South Florida Everglades restoration project, looking at fish modeling. And so my particular models, this was a part of a suite of models that were applied to some of the work that has since been implemented in the restoration of the water systems in the South Florida to regain some of the Everglades. And part of that was this whole suite of cross-trophic level system simulation, this Atlas set of models, which included agent-based models. And so it was every type of model actually you can think of, from differential equations to discrete equations to agent-based models and everything in between, to find the most appropriate model for the appropriate spatial and temporal scales and questions. And so I remember they were looking at the Florida panther, for example, and the Florida panther was in small numbers, particularly at that time. And so they used an agent-based model for that one. And so we also had an agent-based model for the Cape Sable seaside sparrow. So a lot of and even the wading birds had some agent-based models. And so my models were created to feed into agent-based models. And so I saw them as an incredibly useful tool to provide a lot of fine spatial and temporal detail when you're looking particularly in small populations or threatened populations on the edges of things. And so it was a great introduction. And then since then, I've certainly used agent-based models myself for looking at some of the tick and tick-borne diseases I work on. While there are infinite ticks in lots of places, sometimes you want to look at edges or other situations where you need much more of that close interaction than you would get from, say, a differential equation or even a difference equation model, a matrix model of any other kind. So I guess I was exposed a lot in grad school, and then I brought it into my lab, and so I'll let Lexi tell you where I have started preaching that, because she actually finished her PhD with me. So
Yeah, so I started, I guess, working with Holly in between my undergraduate junior, senior year as an internship, and I learned that you could do both math and biology. They weren't just separate entities. And so we started with the basics in NetLogo, even down to like the predator-prey relationships, right? And I fell in love with it. So between the field work and getting in the Great Dismal Swamp collecting ticks to being inside and coding, It became something that I was very excited about. It turned into my undergraduate thesis from there, and then I got an offer to join Holly's lab. The first 3 years of my degree were actually funded through the Virginia Modeling and Analysis and Simulation Center, right, for the MS fellowship at Old well, with Old Dominion University, right? And I went on to get my graduate certificate in modeling and simulation for business and public administration because there wasn't one at the time with biology things. So it was actually really nice to get a different lens on all things agent-based modeling, right? And modeling in general that were not necessarily all tick or ecology based. I think you were actually one of the guest lecturers at one point, Andy, too. I remember you talking about traffic and all of the different evacuation routes. And so from there, I used it, agent-based modeling simulation, right, in my dissertation. We used it to look at ways to control ticks, and in particular, a tick species that hadn't really been studied too much in terms of control in a modeling environment. And then it was so helpful because a lot of the times from a population level, we're able to study things. But I needed to know how an individual tick interacted with the host, right? An animal that may also eat that tick. And so it's this interesting dynamic of who eats who. And being able to look at that within an agent-based modeling world really helped build insight into the systems we weren't able to track in ecology.
Thank you. I mean, that's great. You guys have managed to cover quite a few of my questions already. So I appreciate that. So, I mean, obviously, like I said, mentioned this, and I know this is a difficult question, but you're talking about, obviously you guys are focused in the tick world, you're focused in the vector transmitted disease. But I mean, agent-based modeling is used across biology for a variety of different reasons. I mean, if you could give us like a superficial, sort of like discussion on that, how is it propagated? How do you see it changing? And what do you see the future of it that way?
I mean, I think it's been interesting over the years in biology, agent-based models. So certainly whenever I teach modeling and simulation to my biology graduate students, which I have a class here in biology that does that, biologists relate really well to agent-based models because it includes the details. And I think one of the biggest challenges in working with biology from a modeling perspective is I always jokingly refer to it as ignoring friction, right? So when we study physics, and you do physics without calculus, you ignore friction because it makes it much simpler math and you still can get some concepts out of it. But modeling in biology, when you want to ignore all the details, biologists literally spend their entire lives studying details. They're down to the last little iota of something. And so when you come across like a differential equation model, you'd be like, well, ignore all of that and we're just going to round it off. We're going to average all of that to one number. So your entire career has now been averaged to one single number I'm going to put in for this parameter. And that feels very, I would say dismissive in some ways of the work that goes into a lot of the biology experiments. And so I really see agent-based models kind of step in and allow for that embracing of the stochasticity and the complexities that biologists see in systems as a way to code that into the model itself. And even if it doesn't end up being meaningful in the modeling perspective, it provides an engagement perspective and an understanding that allows their work to feel valued. And I don't mean to be dismissive with that, but I think it is interesting to put all of that in an engaging kind of way. So, I mean, biology, I think most agent-based models started it out in the ecology realm, right? So the ecologists were the first to embrace this with a lot of the flocking work. So looking at how animals move in groups, and even some of the fish work was a lot of agent-based models in that realm. It took a little while longer to crawl over into other areas. Infectious disease was one which came fairly quickly after that because we often think of it as a one-on-one interaction as having a critical component. It's now moved into things like physiology and other areas like that, and even into individualized medicine. And so this is another thinking about how prescription drugs interact with a lot of different things. And so I think that to me is kind of where it fits into like why it helps. I think it helps. I always talk about it as sneaking models into biology because everybody likes to play Pac-Man, and I just explain that this is just Pac-Man or SimWorld or any of those kind of things. So I think that is a helpful sneaking. So, Alexi, have you seen it applied other places?
I think when you'd bring me to conferences, right? And so like in the ecology world, I was usually the oddball doing math. But when we pull it back to more of like the math world, it was always fascinating to me to see all the different systems, right? So like even looking at cancer cell behavior, and every aspect of ecology and in between. But I hadn't thought about it at that small of a level until I started digging into the coursework. Because I was like, ticks are small, right? And then you get into like cellular signaling and everything in between. It's just fascinating, I guess. So the biology, right? You alluded to this a little bit in the beginning. It's a huge field. And so the applications for this are limitless, really. And I think more folks are taking advantage of it now.
So actually, just leading on from that, and I think you hit on a very interesting point. So I'll give an example, and then hopefully that will translate into my question. So recently, I've been involved in a self-study, which is a reflective research practice. As I'm an engineer, and I'm used to everything being procedural, right? And it was really hard to get my head around reflective research, right? It's just like tell me what my steps are, right? It's like, well, there are no steps, right? And we actually, to the degree, we're actually this morning I was editing a paper that I'm writing to someone over in education about this experience. But how do you see that in the biology world? Because I was too arrogant. I'll be frank with you. I was too arrogant to really give kudos to this other type of research. And now that I understand it a bit better, I'm like, wow, this opens up so many doors. How do you struggle with opening that door up for other biology researchers? I mean, you know, how are you tackling that issue?
You want to go first on this one? Do you have any ideas?
Sure. No, I was just I like it. I know it's like it's often I get a lot of pushback, especially in graduate school amongst my peers. Um, Whenever I would start talking math, right, I'd get really excited about what we were working on, and it would take them a second to re-engage, right, while they're out banding birds or doing something much more hands-on, and pulling them back into my world to explain what was going on was always interesting. But it became like a fun challenge of like, how can we connect? How can we build that bridge? How can we explain what I'm doing? And with Holly's lab, right, we would present to folks all the way from like master gardeners to Girl Scouts to the general public at an outreach event, right? And a lot of times they would ask us about our research. And so sometimes I would use that as an opportunity of like, hey, you can do math. And like lean into agent-based modeling specifically because it's something that's so relatable because of all of these systems that we already do, right? Like almost everybody knows that Pac-Man, there is this generational gap that I have learned with teaching classes. That makes me very sad. But beyond that, you can usually relate it back to something, and they have very practical, like you see a person, how do you interact with them? What's the key interactions that would cause disease spread, or what behaviors would make it more at risk for you to get ticks in your backyard? And so we face it, I guess, a lot, right? Like I faced it a lot of this, like, oh, like it's straight up like math is a no, right? Not even just modeling, just math. But getting folks interested, and once they are, the questions are always there, right? It's like an excited kid who learned something new. And not to demean that at all, but I love it. Like I love trying to find a way to get folks interested.
Yeah, and the other analogy I often for the indoor biology, right? So we often relate well to outdoor biology, but indoor biology, the hardcore cell and molecular folks that are often skeptical because again, their whole job has been looking at the protein expression in a single, channel of biochemical signaling inside of a cell. I mean, like there's such finite, really hyper focused, which we really need to understand these systems. But I always explain models is kind of like using a knockout mouse that you ignore. Like a knockout mouse doesn't mean it's going to work in a regular mouse. It just allows you to focus even better. And I often use that analogy of modeling as these are different types of knockout mice have different expressions of their immune system, and so different models are going to ignore different things and include different things, and allow you to understand pieces of the world um, a chunk at a time rather than trying to tease it apart from a very complex system that you're working with. And so I've often run into that, yeah, that pushback, not so much that they hate math. Well, they hate math, let's just be honest, but they also just don't see the use of modeling because it's so often wrong. And I explain, well, it's not a goal of being right, it's a goal of creating understanding in the same kind of way that knockout mice are. So that's just another uh, tool in the toolbox of trying to engage with biologists.
Okay, so leading on from that, I mean, so you mentioned ecology. So the ecologists seem to have engaged with ABM very strongly. But then the biologists, I mean, again, this is my naivety, right? I mean, they're the same subject, aren't they? No, right. But they, just that's like, do you think it's just the nature of the beast of the problems they're looking at that, that the biologists can get away with not having to use ABM, therefore they're not interested in it?
I mean, I think it goes, ABM is even beyond that, right? I mean, modeling in general, if you ask people in sciences, like College of Sciences, well, why are they studying biology? It's usually they'll be like, well, I hate math. And somehow they think they can get away with avoiding math by coming to bio. And so it's kind of the science for those who hate math. And so that's where, yeah, Lexi and I always try to sneaking math in on them. So explaining that no, every aspect of every study needs mathematics. And then agent-based models are even worse, right? Because they're not just math, but they're probabilistic math, which is even harder to wrap your brain around if you hate math to start with or haven't had a solid upbringing in math. Because probability and statistics are not taught well at the lower levels in biology majors. I can just say that point blank. It's across the board. I mean, we try to sneak it into some of our Calc for Life Sciences classes. But if you try to teach genetics, you'll very quickly realize they do not understand probability, and that is a chipping point for me, at least in my experience.
I just wanted to add to like, I don't think that there is this division of like biologists, ecologists, right? I think there are definitely ecologists who also will run away screaming from math and just want to like tackle a deer, put a radio collar on it and study it, right? And that is their passion in life. Where I know others who are in the lab like making matrix models, right? So I think that there for the same thing, there are biologists who are like that, or I guess indoor more like lab cell molecular folks who are probably leaning more into the math world, right? And I think the more we learn, right, with technology and all of the fanciness, right, within the cell molecular world, the more I think modeling will get used, right? We're kind of, if not that we're on the edge, they've been discovering things forever, right? But like, I think that the resources are becoming much more applicable, and it's a field that I think will grow quite a bit.
Okay, thank you. So I'll take one more question and then I'll open up to the audience because I think I like to abuse my time as the host. So by get the questions. So one of the things I've discovered in the ABM world is that large language models, AI, can easily generate agent-based modeling. I've had many examples of students generating simulation models that look impressive, right? But when I quiz them about even the most fundamental basics of the model, they have no idea. Do you see that problem potentially occurring in your domain as well? And if so, what kind of tools are you trying to use, or what kind of things are you trying to do to mitigate that issue? They could basically people producing invalid models and passing it off as science.
I was going to say I've worked with a bunch of students over time, right? And so seeing how they'll throw the code in when it doesn't work right into some sort of AI and get the report back of why it's broken, right? And then they just assume that that is why it's broken and that is the answer and they run with it. And I'm like, but why? Right. And so I usually try to slow them down and we pull it apart and have a conversation about, yes, AI can code. We know it can code, but can it code what you want? And do you know what you want? And breaking that down from the beginning. So we see it too, I guess. I've seen it. And I think it's one of those struggles of developing a like healthy relationship with AI, right? Where it can be used. It is a tool. There are a lot of great advantages of it, but you still have to use your brain. You still have to put you into it. You still have to understand what you're doing. And I think that's a lot of the hesitation around modeling in general too, is folks get worried about validating it. And that validation aspect makes me scared too with AI, right? Because folks don't know what their code is.
Yeah, I think also like when I'm reviewing papers, I review papers in the math bio world all the time, and I'm like, that's not how biology works. And so mathematicians often have not had the right conversations, or they speak past each other, right? So language is a big challenge between math and bio, agent-based modeling and bio. I jokingly say the common example is like a vector, right? And the vector could be a mosquito that gives you a disease, or it could be, magnitude and direction. There's just the language is often a rate limiting factor. You talk to an immunologist on the biology side, and you will have no idea what they're talking about for all their different T cells and expression channels and all this other stuff. And it's just it's such a both worlds tend to be complex enough that mixing them together is a special expertise that requires you to almost have double domain knowledge. And so creating ways to think about, well, yeah, the code has to be right and the biology has to be right. So either you have to be collaborating with someone that you've worked with for long enough to have that language, or, I mean, this is why I make my students all do field work, right? And I do field work. My models from back in the day before I did field work, they're terrible. I'll admit that. They were wrong. I had no idea how ticks actually worked. Now I've collected about 300,000 of them, and I probably know less than when I started, but I pretend I know more. And but it's definitely one of those challenges of how you become or learn to speak across that divide. So um, it's a real challenge, I think, in most fields, yeah, to figure out how to bring both pieces together collaboratively. So like my class on modeling, I'm like, I'm not trying to make you into a modeler. That's great if you are, but more you need to have enough vocabulary to collaborate with across that divide. And I think both sides, honestly, most biologists are more willing to learn math than mathematicians are willing to learn biology, which is kind of funny. But we have to make that jump to make it work.
Yeah, but biology has big words in it. I mean, you can't blame.
Yeah, but biologists are like, math has squiggly lines. I don't understand. Why don't they just stick to the alphabet? What are these Greek letters for? Yeah, they get kind of bent about all of our random changes of letters in alphabet. But yeah.
When you were talking about vocab, I started twitching about tick because tick and that logo and like that became a whole thing. And then when I was in the business class, it was like a whole conversation. Anytime I said tick, we all had to like agree what I
Yes.
meant.
Is it a measure of time, or is it a
Yes.
small eight-legged creature that's crawling at
Had a
you? Yeah.
flashback. Yeah.
It's quite important to know the difference, right?
Yeah, you program it the wrong way, and that logo hates you very much.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you. So thank you both. I'm going to be a good host and open it up to the audience. So if there's any questions from them. So if anybody, there's the numbers here, just honestly feel free to unmute and ask a question. If not, I've got a couple more questions as well that I can ask Lexi and Holly. So
Hey,
Hey.
hi. Thanks a lot for this. Very interesting. I don't get a chance to talk to people doing modeling and biology all that much, but there's a uh, question that's been on my mind a lot as I move from, well, I've done a lot with toy models, really small illustrative models, the shell egg segregation model, that kind of thing that show that, you only need weak racism to produce strong segregation. And, that's a really profound insight that you get from a very simple model. You start, okay, now I'm going to do that on tax parcels and look at real neighborhood segregation. And it turns out that's a disaster. That doesn't work at all. You need to not just, people don't just look at their immediate abutting properties. They look at who their kids are in school with. They look at who's at the grocery store. They have friends. They care about their friends' opinions. It starts getting very complicated once you move off of the dead simple core idea. And yet we have the computing power to do millions and millions of agents. And we can do these things, but sometimes it's not productive. I think there's a big uncanny valley between the simple model and the very complex applied model. And I'm wondering, when I think about ticks, like, I don't really think about like one tick or two ticks. I think of there being lots of ticks. And, I don't know if we're thinking about Lyme disease, there's deer and there's quite a few deer, and there's lots and lots and lots of ticks. And there's quite a few people too. How do you subset that? How complex is it useful to make these models in your field?
I'll let Lexi answer that. She made some great agent-based models for her dissertation.
It reminded me a little bit. So my dissertation looked at guinea fowl and their ability to eat Lone Star ticks. And in the land of like, not all ticks are the same, right? Lone Star ticks are really aggressive. They carry a whole different slew of pathogens, but they're very prominent in Virginia. And so looking at guinea fowl's ability, guinea fowl, everybody's like, oh, they eat ticks, but we don't have a lot of science to back that up. And so navigating the model that we created, we kept it very simple of like, okay, the ticks need food, right? And then my big question was like, how many guinea fowl, or like how much would that interaction and their choice to either eat the tick or be eaten by the tick, right? At what threshold does that change? Because that can inform the ecology. So I think we can get lost in some of the bigger questions, but just looking at that relationship, that I can't identify every single tick that's near a guinea fowl and be like, is it going to bite or is it going to groom off? But in a model environment, I can track all of that. And so that was really beneficial to get some sort of insight into that system for us.
Yeah, it was a very specific and temporal and spatial scale question, right? So it definitely gave it that level, and so in some ways it was a more complex toy model because it was very applied to a backyard that Lexi got to go chase chickens in. But it was only for one field season, right? We never cracked the nut of going that huge valley between that and the next field season even was a question. Well, we know what kind of happens in the short term, but we definitely built that, or she built that model to ask that question in that backyard setting in the single season. What does it do?
So you had kind of a half dozen birds and kind of hundreds of ticks, kind of that kind of scale.
Yeah, I think we went up to the threshold, I think, of 60. We were trying to figure out how many we could fit in the size of the backyard that we had for the patches without homeowners complaining too much. And so like I remember presenting to a math audience and they're like, why didn't you just put 100 birds in there? And I was like, because no homeowner's doing that to themselves in that small of an area. Math, very interesting. Ecology, everybody's going to cry.
No, that is crazy being able to actually do, all my stuff is with humans and I never get to do the experiment. What if I push this kid until he cracks and becomes a terrorist? How hard do you have to push him? Well, you don't get to do that experiment. Thank God.
Actually, I think there's a question from Jacob, which actually follows on quite nicely. He put in the chat, which was, so you're doing modeling. Have you ever seen like something in your models and you've gone, I'm going to test that out with some field work, and then actually got some insight from then doing the field work? Has that ever occurred to you both?
Yeah. Okay. So the other half, so a lot of our stuff was informed through the guinea fowl work, and I did an experiment where we painted ticks, and then we saw that they weren't as effective as we thought, or at least they're said to be, right? The other half of my dissertation looked at a tick killing robot that actually will lure ticks to it using carbon dioxide and following a path. There's a little cloth on the back of it that is treated with a pesticide that kills ticks. And so the ticks get lured to it, they come in contact with the flag, and then they'll die. And so we didn't know how far away we were pulling ticks. And so we put ticks in the optimal situation in a tube, and I have this lovely skill set of painting ticks. So we did like traffic light colors of the closest ticks were green, right? And so on and so forth. We had green, yellow, red, and then saw how far they would crawl in an optimal tube, right, to the carbon dioxide source. And I used that to actually parameterize the model of how far the ticks from other patches, or what percentage of ticks from other patches, would be lured into the treatment area. And that's like one thing, but a lot of my dissertation was these like mini studies of even to the effect of, if a tick comes in contact with that flag, how long till it dies, right? How often do they die? And so we took little flags on the back of pencils that were treated with the same pesticide, right? And just barely touched the tick to see. And it made for a great undergraduate project. We were able to engage tons of undergraduates throughout my dissertation to build these parameters, right? And they're not necessarily parameters that you can pull from literature. And strange encounters too, right? Very unique spatial temporal questions.
Yeah, and a lot of mark recapture even in the field. And Alexi did that of how long does a tick last in the environment, right? Easy way to do that is to catch a few, paint them, put them back, and then see how long you can continue to catch them. And much longer than you think. That's the answer.
Oh, that's the disturbing answer, right? Is they won't die. Okay. Oh, okay. Cool. Thank you. All right. Manas, did you? I noticed you turned your camera on. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I'm a first year student here in the management department at University of Kentucky, and I was interested in agent-based modeling, or uh, building those kind of models which are not, I would say, conventional in our field. And I wanted to get to know, like, what's the right way of getting into, like, a simulation study or agent-based modeling or such things, because I also am a student of social networks, and I thought modeling would be a great way of learning social networks. So I wanted to know, like, what would be the right way to get to know. Yeah.
I mean, certainly I've taught lots and lots of short courses over the years where we just introduce folks to agent-based modeling. I mean, I think to me the key always was to find a particular question that you're interested in playing with, and then building off of anything that anybody's done along those lines. And I strongly encourage just starting with the NetLogo tutorials. They're a great way to learn what agent-based models can do in a very quick and accessible manner. I know that, I don't know just if Los Alamos still has their short course they used to teach out there. There's a few other places you could probably pick that up, and the groups like this that have these kind of opportunities to just learn what other people are doing. And the NetLogo shared libraries are also online communities, online resources. Like Andy said, you don't go to AI for everything, but you certainly can recycle. I mean, we've always recycled code, right? We all share codes, and all of my tick models for agent-based modeling are actually from chemistry codes, because it's all about bonds that break and form, right? That's what ticks do when they grab onto a host. And so it's all recycled code from other pieces of NetLogo spliced together to be able to give us initial stages. You get too big and it starts to cry, but otherwise, yeah, it's I think the key is really to yeah, find that question that you're interested in looking at, and then hitting up some of the, I don't know if you've worked through NetLogo, but I'm a big fan of using it from day one. Of it's free, it's beautiful, it teaches well, has lots of, you can play, like if you get frustrated, like I said, you could play Pac-Man. But it's a very accessible introduction. So.
And I would add to that Yuri Gawinski's book, the one that's connected to it, is brilliant, because then you're literally interacting right there. It's my favorite ABM book at the moment. Cool.
It's right there on the shelf.
Okay.
A few other agent-based modeling books back there, some of the older ones as well. Railsback and Grimm.
Yes. That's cool. So eventually stopped calling it individual-based modeling and started changing it to agent-based.
Yep.
Big move.
Big move. Well, entity-based, all the other fun ones, yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate your discussion today. And I think I think there's no more questions, so I was going to call it a time if that's the case. So thank you, Lexi. Thank you, Holly. Really appreciate you. So thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you for the opportunity.
Guys, thank you for having us.
Thank you.